Everyone's expecting you. If you know them well, you know. Do as I say, not as I do. Welcome, friends, you know. Unity in all that we do. It isn't what you know. Just do as you're expected.
Operation Encore is a 501c nonprofit that is helping veterans turn into rock stars every single day. You can learn more about what Operation Encore is doing by going over to their website at www.operationencore.org. That is www.operationencore.org. If you can give them a hand, just click that little donate button or follow all of their social medias and learn exactly what they are doing to change the lives of our veterans every single day. And welcome everybody to Spirits and Stories. I'm your host, Donald Dunn. Hey, today I have got a guest that we had to reschedule a few months ago, and now we're finally getting to do this. This is going to be an excellent episode, especially for our veteran community. So let me introduce Gary Simons. Gary Simons is a brain surgeon who has cared for tens of thousands of critically ill patients. He started his career in the Army at Walter Reed and was the chief of neurosurgery at a university hospital for many years. He now teaches a number of subjects to undergraduates and medical students at Virginia Tech. He has written 3 nonfiction books on burnout and wellness and has recently published a medical psychological thriller with a paranormal twist entitled Death's Pale Flag. He also writes blog posts for Psychology Today Online and has 3 more novels in progress. Let's bring on Gary Simons. Hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great. Thanks so much for having me, Donald. It's a true pleasure.
I appreciate it, man. I've been looking forward to this. But before we get into the questions and everything that into your career, let's back up just a little bit and give everybody that idea of where you came from and what brought you to the military.
Oh, geez, that's that one goes deep. But I originally born and raised in New Jersey, but my mother was British, and she grew up. She was a teenager and in her 20s during World War II, and my father was in the Navy in World War II, and they met shortly after the war. I'm not going to go so deep for you, so you don't have to worry. But I was kind of steeped as a kid in World War II history. We moved to England for a few years as well, and I guess as a kid, all I ever wanted to see was bomb sites. And so I ended up reading everything I could get my hands on about World War II. And as I got older, I have 2 sisters. They both married Vietnam vets, one a helicopter pilot, one a ground troop Marine. And so I guess that, the military was always out there as, being around. And then, unfortunately, my one sister's husband, when he was back from Vietnam, but he was a helicopter pilot for the National Guard, the New Jersey National Guard, and they were doing runs up at Camp Drum, and their helicopter crashed, and so he was killed. And this was at the time of like MASH, remember the series MASH and stuff, there was so much distrust of the military and so much of this, hangover from the Vietnam era, well, the I, the military took such good care of my sister. They sent representatives out, and at first we were seeing them as oh, they're going to try to bilk my sister, and it was the complete opposite. They did everything they could to support her. She had at the time a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old when this happened. Anyway, so I mean, it really colored my perspective, at least on the military. And there was an opportunity for the military to help with medical school, and so I took what's called an HPSP scholarship, and then went in. So I've always been on the medical side, not a real soldier, but taking care of just amazing people. And I spent most of my time at Walter Reed. But of course, we would take care of patients, military, all branches from all across the country and all over the world, and used to run down to Fort Bragg about once a month and run a clinic down there. So
Okay.
we associated with the real people as much
Yeah.
as we could.
Well, I'm gonna tell you first and foremost, I consider anybody who signed that, put their name on that line as real soldiers, from our National Guard guys to the active duty infantry. It doesn't matter. We all play our role, and you played a very important role in changing the lives of a lot of people. So not everybody's on that front line holding a rifle. Some are holding a scalpel. So it's important for me. I held a wrench, so I can relate. Um, but I think it is important that we honor all of our veterans, not just the guys on the front line, because we all paid a price. So let me ask you a question. When you got into Walter Reed in the medical field, did you come in as a surgeon, or did you start out as a doctor and just work your way up, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so I entered as a reservist in medical school.
Hmm.
And when you start your training after medical school, so being a neurosurgeon, it takes 7 years of training after medical school. And I did that at Walter Reed. And you come in as a reservist, you're a second lieutenant. As soon as you come in, you're a captain.
Hmm.
And so you are now on active duty, the minute you step in. And uh, again, a much easier life than most people, I'm sure, on active duty, although we paid our price in terms of hours and
Yeah.
lost sleep. We in those days, residency was about 110 hours a week in the hospital. We were up every third night, maybe every other night. And when I mean up, I mean zero sleep every third night or every other night. So it's a different different test of your mettle. Nobody's shooting at me, but it definitely had its grueling nature to it.
Yeah. So I mean, I just try to picture doing what you do, because I there's no way I could do it. No way. I could sooner probably hold a rifle and be on the front lines than I could do what you do. Um, I just the brain is so fascinating, and I do strongly believe there's still so much out there that we don't know about it. But what was what was an average day for you like? I mean, was it like occasionally doing surgeries, or was it just like back to back? Because I'm not sure what era you were in Walter Reed for.
So most of my time in the military was relatively peaceful. Desert Storm hit when I was what's called a chief resident. That's the last year of your residency. But of course, I mean, there weren't a lot of casualties. The grand majority of casualties that were seen, the American casualties were car accidents. There wasn't a lot of military wounds. So it was more kind of the standard exposure in to the things that happen to people that require neurosurgery. And when you're, when the military medical system is caring for millions of people, because at least in those days we cared for all active duty, all retirees, and all dependents. You have a very busy time. So
Yeah.
the typical day is you get in at the crack of dawn, usually, somewhere in the 6 o'clock range or earlier, because you got to go check on the sick patients, the people who are in ICUs and that sort of thing. And then often surgery gets off the ground somewhere in the 7 to 7:30 range. And you might do anywhere from 2 to 5 operations, depending on the length of the operations and what needs to be done and what's coming in. And in between, you're kind of running about all day. There really is no downtime.
Right.
You kind of get your food out of a machine and then keep running from one thing to another. And the thing about neurosurgery is there's always a disaster. It's, as you're pointing out, it's an incredibly important and complex organ that we deal with, and it gets into trouble fast. So when things go downhill, they go downhill, precipitously. And so when you have enough patients, and we, like at Reed, I don't know, we'd have 100 plus patients on our service. And people would be getting sick periodically, and one disaster after another. Now, the thing that we didn't do a lot of at Reed was emergencies coming in, if you will. So after I left, I worked at trauma centers, and they have the helicopters coming in. It just feels like every other minute.
Wow.
Coming in with car accidents and various types of trauma and hemorrhages in the brain and stuff. And the thing about Reed is we didn't have a base right around us. It's not situated in a base. And therefore stuff was always somewhat delayed getting to us, but it was usually big, nasty, complex stuff that ended up at Reed. So, what you traded off for that kind of emergency stuff, you got with very sick patients, very injured or very sick patients.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine listening to this how how hard it is, because the lifestyle that you're forced to live is like the exact opposite what you would recommend to a patient.
It's so
Don't
true.
eat out of a machine, get 8 hours of sleep. You're staying up 24 hours every 3 days, eating out of a machine, and I understand why. I mean, I do. It's just, man, it seems like it takes such a toll on your body physically, and then I can imagine, losing a patient or something, how mentally that can be challenging as well, especially with your body already being kind of worn down from the standard week. So, man, my hat's off to you. That's a tall task to ask.
I think you make excellent points there, Donald, because I mean, I, as you had mentioned in the intro, I eventually got interested in burnout, particularly in healthcare workers. We started with neurosurgeons, but then kind of broadened it to all healthcare workers, and really investigated a lot and did a lot of work and writing on it. But you're absolutely right. It's everything we did was probably the antithesis of what we're supposed to be doing in taking care of ourselves. And you're that connection between mind and body, I think, is also absolutely critical. I mean, we were just basically sacrificing our bodies, to the specialty, and you have to, and it's not as hard as it sounds. I have no doubt that you could do a wonderful job in it, because it's one of those things that once you're in it, you don't even really think about it. You just do it, right? The problems are there, you address them, and time goes by.
Yeah. I mean, and the good positive side of that too is when you're that busy. like you just said, you kind of don't think about how tired you are. It's just the time's flying by, and you're occupied doing what you're trained to do. You're talking about the brain, and one of the things that I want to get into, because we always hear a lot about PTSD, but we don't hear a whole lot about TBI. Unless you're talking to somebody that's been diagnosed, and then maybe they can tell you a little bit about it. But in generally, when you're talking to a civilian and you say the word veteran, they automatically assume PTSD.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of effects from TBI. Can you talk a little bit about what TBI does to the brain?
Sure. It's, my answers will probably be fairly general because there's a big depends on it. There's a big depends, and that is, it depends on the actual injury. There are many different types of brain injuries that can occur. Certainly, during the second, uh, Iraq War and all the postscript from that. There were a lot of significant TBIs from IEDs and stuff, blast injuries,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a general diffuse, meaning all the way across the brain type of injury where the brain gets abruptly, heavily shaken, and it sits in the head, um, in a bag of fluid. The brain sits in a bag of fluid. So if the head gets shaken about, the brain gets shaken within that bag of fluid and can kind of slosh up, if you will, and smack the sides of the skull anywhere at the bottom, at the top, on the sides, back and front. But then there's even a more ominous type of injury that can go along with that. And that's if the head gets turned super fast. What happens is the brain starts to turn on itself, on its brain stem. The brain has a brain stem, and it starts to turn on itself, but they turn at different rates. So it's almost like you're ringing the brain,
Oh, wow.
and what that does is it stretches millions. It can be billions, but at least millions of these really, really fine cables, super microscopic cables, which are the nerve cells processes going from one nerve cell to another. It's the way the brain is wired. It's the wires of the brain, but they are super, super thin cables. So if you start twisting them and stretching them, you can damage millions of them. And so in the end, there is no test currently that can tell you exactly how much is injured and which ones exactly are injured. And where you're talking, again, millions and millions and millions of cables. So depending on the degree of the injury, depending on the degree of all this stretching and the thumping of the brain within the head, you can see whole different levels of injury across the brain. Of course, the worst ones may stop the brain from working altogether and kill somebody. But one step down, it can put somebody into coma, and sometimes those comas can last forever, or somebody hopefully can come out of it. And then it can be all the way up to just a mild concussion and everything in between. And it can be very hard to sort out, again, how much injury there is, and how a person's going to do, because we never know, at least at this stage in our technology, we can't tell how many of those cables are stretched and damaged but may repair themselves, and how many are torn. And if they're torn, the brain doesn't fix it. You can't fix a torn nerve cells. So these nerve cells, if they're torn, they're dead. If they're stretched, they may get better. And so we're often put into a situation where all we can do is support the brain, do what we can to keep it from getting worse, and then hope for the best and see how the body heals it along. Therefore, you can just see almost any imaginable after effects of a TBI.
Hmm.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. So if you can't tell how many are torn or stretched, how do they test to see? How do they diagnose somebody with TBI?
Up front, we do it with the what's happened to the person and how they're functioning. So it's pretty easy if you've been in a bad car accident or an IED went off nearby or something, and the person's in coma. Well, you know exactly what's happened. They've
Right.
had a bad TBI, and of course we'll get scans and we'll look for evidence of bleeding in the brain and stuff like that, which all supports it, but we pretty much know it, right? Where it can get much subtle is on the other end, where people have been through some form of head injury, and a lot of us get. I had 4 or 5 concussions when I was in college, playing sports, and hopefully it it didn't do too much long-term stuff, but it can be very much on the mild side. So sometimes it's going to come down to, some sort of history of trauma and some sort of low level dysfunction of the brain. And that can manifest itself in many ways, but a lot of times it's going to come out in the higher cognitive functions, meaning, how well do we process things? How well are we thinking? How well is, we call it executive function, all the stuff that we do that really makes us human, that the deep thinking, the projecting to the future, the ability to do calculations and all that sort of thing, and then as well as memory, and so you can see evidence of memory problems, for example. Sometimes the better test isn't some sort of MRI or CAT scan or PET scan or this scan or that scan. Sometimes the better studies come out of something that they call neuropsychometrics, which is really doing an in-depth testing of somebody's thinking, their cognitive function. So that's often what it might come down to on the one end of the spectrum. As I said, the other end is pretty easy. If somebody's, knocked unconscious or they're in coma or something.
The reason why I ask this is, so I didn't, when I first got out of the military, I didn't admit that there was anything wrong with me. Typical soldier story.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of anger problems, a lot of depression, and I got into it with the VA. So to prove that I'm right, I didn't go see him. I didn't go file claims, for like 3 years after I got out of the military, all because of one conversation. Stupid. And um, after I finally reached out for help, I still didn't go to the VA. I went to a civilian therapist, a psychologist. And after him talking to me, he asked me if I had ever been diagnosed with TBI. And I said, no. I said, I have never done anything to find out. And the reason was because he's seen some memory issues that I was having. And now, fast forward years later, as I'm getting older, I am starting to have a lot of memory issues, like trying to remember exactly what my kids look like at their pre 1 year old age. You know, I don't exactly remember those. I don't remember their favorite shows. I don't remember a lot of things about those. Um, in my stories when I'm deploying, sometimes I tell a story like I remembered it exactly, and then after that, I start thinking about it. I was like, was that Afghanistan or was that Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I really struggle with those memories, and it's made the book that I'm writing really, really tough because sometimes I just have to stop and spend a day or two thinking about it and trying to figure out where that story really did happen at.
Well,
Um,
just one thing, you make another great point that I left out, and that is emotions, not just memory, not just cognitive function, but emotional control and emotional, just our emotional beings can
mm,
be knocked off kilter.
yeah, and I think back to, so I played football all through high school.
Mhm.
From I mean, from middle school all the way up. And then I came in the Army and I started boxing. And I
Mhm.
loved it, you know. And yes, I've been knocked unconscious and I'm sure I've had some concussions. And I definitely, after each match, you have whiplash from your head getting snapped back and everything else. And I did it for several years. I loved it. And there was, like I said, there was times that I didn't remember what had happened. If my wife hadn't been videotaping, I wouldn't have realized what knocked me out, you know. But not just that, but then you fast forward later to after 9/11, and I mean, I've been within 75 yards of rockets hitting generators and stuff like that. Tons of IEDs and just bombs and mortars and everything. So it kind of started making me wonder if, TBI isn't part of the issue, but then I'm also on antidepressants and other things. And I know some of those side effects can also be cognitive issues. So I'm just now getting that point where I'm trying to get off the big pharma meds. And, I've done a lot of work with my temper. That's for sure. That group therapy that I found helped me tremendously with at least controlling my emotions. I'm not going to say that they're completely, that I don't get mad anymore over stupid stuff. I do. It's just no longer at 0 to 60 in 1.2 seconds.
Mhm.
It takes me a little bit longer, and I have time to think through things a little bit. So that type of stuff helps. But it kind of makes me wonder if, you know, something like that is quite possible with me. And I'm sure there's a lot of other veterans out there that feel that same way. That, well, I can't have TBI. I was never in an IED explosion. I seen one happen 2 vehicles up, but I was never the one hit, so I can't have TBI. But I think there's a lot of people out there that feel that way and are probably suffering in some form of a TBI.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think and all that you're discussing can be related to TBI. I obviously emotional challenges are there everywhere in everybody's lives to one degree or another. But if somebody has sustained TBI, um, just the mechanisms of control may not be as readily available, and the whole system may not, it's like a fine-tuned, sports car. It may still work, but if the timing's off, it's not necessarily going to work the way it once did.
Yep,
And so it doesn't shock me at all. We find out more and more as the years go on. Even, for example, there's been a lot of stuff recently about people who are around artillery, right? When just firing the artillery,
yeah,
not the bombs going off around them, but just firing. There is a significant percussion wave going through everybody
absolutely.
around it, and and you're doing it over and over and over again. So yeah, and yes, I think the sports that we play and stuff way back when we're younger and all, I'm sure that we uh, do some damage there potentially. I think boxing probably is up there as one of the ones that uh, can do it more than others. It's funny though, or not. I don't know if it's funny, but I always said, because there's a lot of talk in my world about football
Hmm.
and whether kids should be allowed to play football and all that sort of thing. And the one comeback I have is, yes, I know there are head injuries and I know the head gets jolted around, and all the helmets in the world, by the way, doesn't keep the brain from sloshing around inside the head. So,
Right.
probably the best thing is strong necks. Probably not have young kids playing, where have them play flag or something, and
Yep.
not get their when their necks are so weak compared to the weight of their head. But anyway, I always say the counter is, I've seen far more kids injured when they're out on their own recognizance instead of in an organized sport. Far more kids are coming in with bad head injuries when they were on their bikes, on their skateboards, on doing the crazy stuff particularly guys, the crazy stuff that guys do when,
Yep.
you're young and stuff. So it's all a mix. There's no two ways about it. And as I said, we haven't got to the level of technology where we can absolutely tease it out and say, oh, here are the exact injuries that somebody has, and here's the reason why. But it all starts to make sense. People who are in a combat zone, they're getting subjected to a lot more than the classic, right next to you explosion.
Yep. No, absolutely. I completely agree. And I agree as well. I'm a huge football fan. I mean, I love football. But I do agree, especially in the ages where children are, where it's crucial for them to be learning and everything else. I don't think they should be playing tackle football. I think the years should be more focused on the fundamentals of how to tackle appropriately without hurting yourself or hurting the other person, and instilling those things. You see it in the NFL right now. I mean, they're changing everything about
Yeah.
how you land on people, how you tackle, and we need everybody to follow suit all the way down to the Pop Warner levels of teaching these fundamentals, because right now the players are coming out of college and then having to adjust particularly to that new style of tackling. And now they have to rewire their whole brain. You've seen it the first year of the NFL when they implemented it. Nobody had that control to stop. At by that time it's muscle memory, and
Yeah.
so but I do agree with those rules. A lot of football players don't, but I do agree with that targeting penalties, and you should not be leading with your helmet, and no helmet to helmet contact. And I do agree with all that stuff because, as much as regardless of what they make and how the sport is, I don't want to see anybody end up like boxers do years down the road from their careers.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. A bunch of my friends are involved in the whole pro football, management of head injury and trying to get it all reduced. And hopefully, again, part of it too is the refs have to, the refs have to control it,
Yep.
and you can make it, I guess, relatively safe in the end.
Safe. Yeah.
One of the questions that's still out there, I guess, is the linemen, because
Yeah.
they're not necessarily getting these big hits, but every snap there's a lot of thumping of heads going on. Not
Yeah.
concussive, not to the point where they're knocked out or anything, but what people are trying to figure out is whether so many just light smacks
Yeah.
are going to result in long-term problems as well.
I kind of relate that same thing to in boxing a jab.
Yeah,
It's not super powerful, but there's a lot of them thrown throughout the match, and
exactly.
they're all landing somewhat. Your head's still getting bobbed back, just not full force, but it's repetitive. So that does make perfect sense too, and I would imagine it would have some sort of effect. There's no way it can't have any effect. It has to affect something. You
Yeah,
know.
I agree. I mean, I'm much more a soccer player, and but they're even talking about heading the ball in soccer, and part of me is like, that's nonsense. One of my old coaches used to wait till these cold rainy days, and he used to be a goalie in college, and he would take the heaviest, wettest leather ball and punt it 50 yards, and then two of us would have to fight to head it. And when that thing came down, it just, it's so, I can still feel it coming down on my head.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so and so we get back to that thing though, is nothing in life is risk free, and you make your choices, and I mean, just hopefully we keep it within some common sense.
Yeah.
And again, I've seen far more young people, teenagers, early 20s ruined by cars than anything else.
Yeah.
Absolutely, by far.
Well,
Uh,
that would make perfect sense because America does the whole driving thing completely backwards. When you're in the UK, I don't know if England's the same way as Germany, But in Germany, you can drink before you can drive. Um, and you're talking now a 21, 22-year old is the average age before they get their driver's license.
Hmm.
And they may have been drinking since they were 17, 18. And so when they do get their license, the drinking is no longer the big deal. I got to go do it, because they've been doing it. And but driving is now the big deal. And because it took so long to get their license, and their laws are so strict that once you lose it, it's done. Have a nice day. You're never getting it again. Um, it's more managed. Well, for us, you got that 18-year-old, 17-year-old that's driving, and they want to do burnouts. They want to drive fast. I know because I was that guy.
Yeah, me too.
You know? And then we can turn 21 and we can drink, but now driving has become the everyday thing. Well, I can drink and then go get in the car and drive. I don't even have to think about driving. My body just does it. And I think we do it backwards, and that probably leads to a lot of the accidents that you're talking about and seeing. It's just a young kid who, what's it, 25 on average is before a male becomes, really mature and starts thinking through things. But which is another reason why you don't get a discount on your insurance till you're
Right.
25.
Yeah,
but
and not to mention there in Europe, they can walk to the bar, the pub
Yeah,
or whatever, and they don't even have to get in their car to drive,
yep,
to go have a drink. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it is, and it's tragic. I'm telling you, you walk through one of our ICUs and you just see a whole line of 19 and 20-year-olds all lined up in deep coma, will never be normal again,
yeah,
if they're lucky enough to get out of the coma. And almost always nowadays, because the cars are much safer, almost always they didn't put their seatbelt on. So they
yeah,
actually went through the windshield.
yep. Yeah, I mean, that happened to my dad back in the 50s. He was in the military, and he got put out of the military because of it. But he went through um, a windshield and had to have a steel plate put in his
Mhm.
head and everything else. So yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. Well, let me ask you this: Is there any way to see like the damages from PTSD or TBI from like a CAT scan or something like that? Would the brain be different in any way, or is like PTSD? We'll take PTSD for example. Is there any difference in the appearance of the brain, or is it all just how the wiring is tied in?
I Yes and no, and so bear with me for a sec. I'll kind of get into some of the neuroscience background of it. First, let me just say with TBI, again, you can have a MRI that looks pristine, it looks great, and there can be significant TBI. I mean, there can be significant dysfunction. So you got to be real careful about assuming that something's normal. The opposite is true too. You can have a brain that looks just awful, and the person's functioning quite well. So
Oh,
without that correlation, it can be very difficult sometimes to put a degree on things. And I go back to, it matters how the brain's working.
mhm,
So when we talk about memory problems, when we talk about not thinking our way through things as well as we once did, when we talk about emotional control and stuff, to me those are more sensitive indicators of a previous TBI than an MRI is going to be for me. Yeah, it's nice to see. I mean, nice is the wrong word, but if you see widespread damage of the brain on the MRI, well, you can say, yeah, I mean, of course, there's widespread damage. I see it all over the place. All right, well, that at least but nonetheless, what matters is how the person's doing.
right,
So, ultimately, the finest, most sensitive testing that we have at this juncture still really is, how's a person doing? When you get to PTSD, there is a whole realm of neuroscience right now, and I think it's very cool stuff on a couple of levels. and ultimately, I think there's a positivity to it, a positive message to it. So bear with me for half a second. Um,
Absolutely.
th- there's, I think a lot of people see our brains as being basically a computer, a supercomputer, if you will,
Yep.
and capable of amazing things and all that. But one way or the other, like a computer, where what's happened is it's consists of lots and lots of wires and areas connecting with other areas via these wires, just like a computer. Uh, and that basically you have this wiring diagram behind it all these microchips and this wiring diagram that gets put together in the factory.
Hmm.
And then once it's put together, that's what you got. Boom, here's your computer. And we load it with a lot of software, right? We put in all our teaching and learning and all that, but we're just loading software into this mainframe. And I think a lot of people see it that way, and there is some truth to it in that the basic wiring diagram is fairly consistent from person to person.
Hmm.
One difference is there are on the order of 80 to 100 billion wires, uh, nerve cells that do this, that send
Wow.
out the wires. Each nerve cell can send out hundreds or thousands of connections to other nerve cells. So now you're talking trillions, or who knows? I can't
Wow.
even figure out what the numbers are, but these just massive amounts of wire connections going on. And unlike the computer, even though the main pathways, the main architecture, the main wiring diagram is fairly consistent from one person to another, when you get down to the microscopic level, it is always changing. It is nonstop changing. And
Wow.
that is whatever we're experiencing, whatever we're thinking, whatever we're seeing, whatever we're hearing, whatever everything that's going on around us impacts the way the brain works down on the microscopic level. So it may decide that, boy, we're really using this network of nerves a lot. Let's strengthen those networks. We'll create more connections, not more nerve cells, but more connections between them. We'll strengthen the connections so that it becomes easier for one nerve to communicate to the next nerve. And it's literally changing nonstop. So when we ask about something like PTSD or any situation of high stress, either huge episodic stress, like being attacked in a war zone, or chronic grinding stress, if you will, we are changing whole networks of these nerve cells, at least at the microscopic level, as that's going on. And what we're doing actually is rerouting our systems out of kind of our highest levels of function, which is there for when things are pretty cool, and it allows us to really think and really project into the future and really get enjoyment out of the things around us. Those systems are there when everything is chill.
Hmm.
But there's other systems in the brain that are designed to get us out of trouble, and those systems are going to take over if the brain senses that it's in danger, that it's at risk, that bad things are going to happen if we don't get something taken care of. And what happens is we start de-emphasizing the high level stuff, and we start really focusing on the kind of the emotional side of us. But it's the negative emotions. It's like fear, terror, anger. These are the things that if we had to fight a saber-toothed tiger, is what's going to potentially get us out of there alive. but
Yeah.
there's not a lot of thinking going on. It'd be
Right.
like being in the middle of a boxing match after you've been hit in the face a few times. You're not doing a lot of thinking now, right?
Right.
You're just kind of
Exactly.
shifting gears, and uh, so, but so when you ask, does it change the brain? Absolutely. Can you see this? Yes. Even though this is very microscopic where this is going on, if it goes on enough and if it's bad enough, regions of the brain literally either shrink, which would be the areas that are working at their prime when everything is chill, and other areas of the brain actually grow. So there's an area called the amygdala, for example, and the amygdala is in charge of attaching big emotions with all our experiences and all our memories and all our experiences, particularly fear and anger. And if we've been subjected to, major league stress, the amygdala gets bigger. It literally gets bigger, and you can see more connections in it and stuff. Whereas the things that connect out to our memories often are downgraded. And certainly the areas that connect up to our high orders of thinking gets downgraded. And it can be a true physical change that we're seeing, representing what's going on way down on the microscopic level.
Right.
So now, is that directly correlatable? Is it measurable where you can say, oh, you've got this much change in your brain, therefore you have this much PTSD? Absolutely not.
Right.
We don't have anything like that.
Well, I guess that makes sense why you don't see a lot of testing, because the whole time I've gone through the VA and on the civilian side, I've never had anybody say, well, we need to do a CAT scan and look at your brain. It's all been a lot of questionnaires and cognitive type things, I guess. So I guess that all does make sense. Why? Because those are the better indicators than any imaging that you're going to get. I guess
Exactly.
the imaging is just going to be a secondary confirmation if they see anything at all.
Right.
So,
If they see something, they can say, "Oh, okay, we see something." But what does that mean?
right,
What matters is how are you functioning? How are you doing? And
absolutely.
it's not like they can, related to PTSD or related to TBI. It's not like they can see something, usually at least, and say, "Oh, let's go fix that." It doesn't work that way. So
Right.
again, by far the most sensitive indicators that we have, the most sensitive testing that we have, are all these cognitive, emotional evaluations and that sort of thing, memory evaluations.
Well, that makes sense. It's sad because, I do feel that there's probably a lot of, like we said earlier, a lot of people out there, not just veterans, but there's probably a lot of people in general that are suffering from this. And, there for a while, I just kind of blew it off as I'm getting older, memory's getting worse. I got, what they call it? CRS, can't remember shit. You know, I just kind
Well,
of chalked it
how
off.
old are you, Donald? How old are you?
I'm 49.
Well, just wait. Give it another 20 years, buddy.
Well, what I've learned so far is, since we all started out pretty much the same, I believe my brain was created on a Friday before a 4-day holiday. The guy wanted to get off early, man.
So one other thing though, okay, the flip side of that, the flip side of what I was talking about is that we can change our brain for the better.
Mhm.
And it sounds a little, I don't know, Pollyanna-ish, or it sounds a little psychobabble-ish or something. But the reality is, if the brain can shift to this kind of more negative side and shrink some of the more positive things, it can also go the other direction.
Yeah.
And therefore, just like you're telling me, these group sessions and all, that's the type of thing that potentially is downgrading all that fight or flight stuff, which is, what we commonly call that negative side of us, and upgrading the cognitive sides. So we are you are basically grooving the the better neuronal systems, the ones that you really want to be working, and you may find that it actually starts to improve because you're strengthening those networks in your brain.
Yeah.
So I think there should be always optimism in dealing with this, because the brain is really neat in how it can change for the better just as much as it can change for the worse.
Yeah, I do agree, and kind of goes along with what we said at the beginning. I think there's so much more about the brain that we just don't know, um, because of now that I know why. I mean, we're talking trillions of cells that we probably can't even see
Oh no, yeah.
or even figure out. So and we'll save this question for another show down the road. But it kind of makes me wonder if something like stem cells, if there's any play that could help something like that. But we'll save that for another show. But it's got me thinking about that. I want to dig into your book now, particularly the latest one. Um, so where I kind of gathered some of this came from your lifestyle, the hours and everything that you worked. But where did the desire for this book come from?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So originally it was going to be nonfiction. I mean, my whole world was nonfiction, right? You're always writing something,
Yep.
one way or the other. Um, and through the years, I used to think, geez, this is a crazy world I inhabit. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
what we do and what we see is crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people really know it or have any sense of it. And I can't even watch a medical show because it is just so off.
Yeah.
It's just nowhere even close. So I just always wanted to kind of get out there one way or the other a little bit about that world. One, just to see what it feels like and see what is being done and what can be done, and some of the stories of the patients. On another level, too, I always wanted. I if you if you ask me kind of what was the main driver in being in the field, uh, by far the thing that inspired me the most was the patients and their families. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to talk about bravery and courageousness under terrible situations. And I always use the term grace. They're just so full of grace all the time under just horrendous circumstances.
Right.
It was super inspiring. So I wanted to figure out, how do I get that on paper as well? Anyway, I started writing a nonfiction account of it all, and I was just like, this is just too boring. People aren't even going to bother. So then I wanted to wrap it up, into a story that may hopefully get people to keep turning the pages, get some of those points across, as well as maybe hopefully have a good scare, if you will. And so I wrapped it up into a somewhat paranormal story.
I think that is perfect because we use the word paranormal, but I think really what paranormal should mean is just we don't understand. Um,
Sure.
and and so I am a believer in things like psychic abilities and stuff like that. I Obviously there's some truth to it because there's been several government programs that use what they call remote viewing and stuff like that, and we're not the only country that does it or attempts to do it. Um, but I think all of those come from parts of that brain that we don't know about, that just some people had the ability or managed to be able to tap into it. And that's one of those things that where people are different. My wife can wiggle her nose and I can't. So, you know, those are different muscles. And my brain was made on a Friday. So, but, um, I think it is neat the way that you did this. I think it's important. Me personally, I'm struggling with my nonfiction book, but I really enjoy writing my fiction book
Yeah.
because I can put myself in these characters and I can almost see what they're seeing. And I if I'm not feeling that, I just quit writing. Um, and as long as I'm feeling that, I keep writing. So there's no time frame. I don't have any limits. It's just when my mind allows me to get in that state where I can picture the conversations, and then I keep doing it. So I do like that side of the book. When you wrote this one compared to some of your nonfiction, um, which one was easier for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess you can. It goes one of a couple ways. I completely agree with you. So when I'm writing something nonfiction, I feel like I'm back in high school, and
Yeah.
I'm doing a book report, and
Yep.
I'm just like, God, get me through this next. On the other hand, it's really easy because if you know what you're writing about, you can get it done. It's just getting past the inertia of it being a book report. So with writing fiction, exactly what you said. Oh, I mean, it felt so liberating,
Yeah.
and it's like you can you can make up anything. The problem that I had with it is I couldn't I I couldn't stop. It just kept pouring out all over the place,
Yep.
and it got too long, too complex, too many characters, too many side stories. It was 2.5 times the length that it is now, because there's just so much crap that I dropped in it. So it ended up more work because I had to do all sorts of rewriting and editing and cutting it down and all that sort of thing. But when I sit down and write fiction, I'll look up and 6 hours have passed and I go, God, I haven't even moved.
Yeah.
it is a joy to do.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And the problem I find with my nonfiction books is I will start writing, and then halfway through it, I forget that the people I'm writing to don't know what I was like when I lived in Germany or what the areas was like. And I start skipping a lot of the details and just trying to go to the meat and potatoes. And then you get done with that chapter and you're like, oh, awesome. It was 1,200 words. Great. you know so then you have to go back, and that instantly tells me I've left out a bunch of details that are not going to, now the story's not going to make any sense to anybody because they weren't with me when I was there. And so I have to then go back and piece those pieces together. This particular book that I'm talking about, I originally wrote it for my wife and kids. um, my wife was with me from seventh grade. Summer of seventh grade, we started dating, and we got
Wow.
married right out of high school. She's been with me through the whole military career. We're still married today, 29 years this July.
Congrats.
And so they knew me. My wife knew me the pre-military. My kids knew me the early military, and their more critical years, their pubic years, is when I was starting to struggle. And I never talked about anything at home. Sometimes my son would ask me and I'd just shake it off and just give him a blah answer and go about my day. My wife knew there was problems, but I didn't tell her either. She, for like several years, she quit sleeping in the same bed with me because she was waking up with bruises on her forehead where I guess I'd be throwing my arms and she'd get hit. And, she said I'd be screaming at night and stuff like that. And, I would get up and be sitting on the edge of the bed trying just to catch myself for a minute, and she would ask me, "What's wrong?" I just tell her, "Bad dream." And she'd say, "Well, what's it about?" I said, "I don't remember." You know? So I wrote this book to piece all that together for them because I didn't do it when everything's going, and I wanted them to understand why I'm now having to go back through my life and fix a lot of things because of what I was going through. Um, and so I left out a lot of those details because they were with me. And then my daughter told me she thinks I should publish it. So now I'm going back through and rewriting it again, adding all these details. And man, it's been such a struggle. It really has, because you have to choose and pick and choose what's important and what's rambling, you know?
Yeah, yeah, no, it sounds like a great thing to do, though. I think is it's probably both good for your family, good for you, and would be
Yeah.
good for other families to read through. It's interesting even that you say that I tried to do some stuff, particularly so we trained residents, you know, in my last incantation. I was head of a training program, and we're training residents in their 7 years of torture, and I would was always trying to figure out a way to get it clear to their families what they were going through, because of the exact same thing you're talking about. I did the exact same thing as you, just in a different scenario. That is, I never talked about what was going on at the hospital, never. Right. And so I'd come home, and my poor wife, she's an occupational therapist. She wanted to hear about it. I was like, nope, none of that's coming out. Which again, it's the antithesis of what we should be doing. We don't need to be sitting there reliving every single second. But what we recommend, for example, in our books is that sometimes we do discuss the things that stress us, but we don't need the nitty-gritty details. We need to go over, how is it affecting us? What's it make us feeling? What's it make us think? You know, are there better ways we can handle it? That sort of thing. But anyway, long story short, with these books that we wrote about burnout in medicine, what we found was family members are some of the biggest fans. And they say, oh my gosh, when I started reading, you know, what my husband or wife is going through, I get it now. I get why they come home drained. I get why sometimes, you know, they just want to go sit out in the back and stare and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the last few years, I didn't even realize I was doing anything wrong, but I would come home and I would eat in the front room with the family. And then I would get up and go to the bedroom and I would stay there, and it felt good to me. What I didn't realize is my family didn't understand why I was doing that, and I was pushing them away at the same time. So that's where, you know, these types of things are getting tied in with explaining, you know, what my thinking was, right or wrong, you know, but what I was physically thinking at the time. I think it's important. And I hope that when I do publish it, that it might help families that are in the stages of seeing the change in their spouse, whether it be a first responder that's seeing tragedy, you know, an EMT or something, or a soldier. It doesn't matter. Trauma is trauma. And I just recently put that together with another gentleman that came on my show. He was a British soldier, Army. And we were having a conversation comparing the differences between Afghanistan for him and me. And at the end of it, he made a comment that his other podcast that he has is strictly about mental health. I said, oh yeah. I said, we have a lot of those too here. And he said, yeah, he said, we just got too many soldiers that are killing themselves. And it hit me like a bunch of rocks, man. I was like, that's not just an American problem, you know? And then the philosophical side of me got into it and was thinking, man, I wonder if our enemies are out there killing themselves. You know, I wonder if they're having
I'm sure they are
problems, you know? And that's where I realized, man, you know, as the veteran community, we're trying to help soldiers, but really this is a human problem, not just a veteran problem.
Yeah, there's an extension of that too, I think, and you can tell me if you did this too. But I would come home sometimes from work. I have 3 sons, and I'd look at one of the sons, and he would be looking all hangdog, looking like the world is a miserable place. I'd be like, hey, what's going on? Oh, Mary just broke up with me. And my immediate reflexive response would be, well, consider yourself lucky, because up in the ICU, there's 10 kids your age who are in coma. Yeah. And it's like we have some rating of stress and suffering that goes on in our minds. And unless you reach a certain level, it's, your problem's not worthy. And the reality is, you can't measure the suffering of one person versus another. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And some people are going to be a little bit more resilient in the face of stress, and some people aren't. And it's not a weakness. It's not, it's just the personal responses. But we can't measure the suffering level or the stress level. It's just not fair. It's how we respond.
Yep. It's unfortunate, but I see that a lot in the veteran community.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
You really do. And this is what I've said it several times through several different shows. Here's my thoughts on that. My thoughts are that part of this is about where you came from, right?
Hmm.
You take somebody that grew up in a perfect life, had a mother, had a father, was loved, but the worst thing that ever happened to them was they got a C minus one time. And then they go to war and a couple bombs land on the same post that they're on. Not necessarily in their vicinity, but a couple mortars hit the other side of the base and they heard the explosions and it bothered them. Then you take a guy that grew up in, say, the streets of New York City and gunshots was an everyday thing for him. Well, that person might take a little bit more to, the mortar that hit the other side of the base ain't even going to bother him. He's going to laugh that off potentially. But when he goes out of the wire and he's being shot at and people are getting hit around him, well, now that bothers him. And and it's not about whether this is what has to bother you if you don't get to this level, you know, but it's about your upbringing. What were you able to handle from your life experiences? And I think that plays a big part of that. And so I always tell people, do not think that because you fought and won and somebody else is still struggling and they went through what you feel to be lesser than you, don't judge that.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's got their own path that they have to take. And what worked for one ain't going to work for the other.
And going back to our neuroscience, we're all wired differently as well. So, we're passing a judgment on other people's wiring. They didn't choose that. They didn't choose their brain. They have what they have, and that's that. Also, I think there's also, Donald, I think there's a cumulative side to it too. So you could have, it could be death by 1,000 cuts, a lot of little traumas, a lot of little stressors versus a couple of big ones, and it may still have a massive impact on your function.
Yeah. Just so you know, I'm going to cut that part out as a reel and I'm going to send that to my wife and tell her a neurosurgeon just proved my point. Women are wired different.
Oh, believe me, I believe that one. You don't have to tell me that one. I always say though, the easiest way to survive that, because I believe it. I always say they're wired better than us. I mean,
Well, I usually say backwards, but okay.
I don't know. I always say to our discussion here, I always say that women are superior in virtually everything other than a male's ability to injure or harm another human being. I think that's kind of hardwired into us to one degree or another.
No, I agree. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to bring you forward, give you a chance to tell everybody about. I know I've had your link going at the bottom, but if there's any other places that you would like people to come and visit, if you want to tell them a little bit more about your book, I'm going to give you that opportunity to plug yourself, and then we'll throw the exit video out, and we'll wrap it all up.
Well, this has been a total delight. So thank you so much. But yeah, I don't think, I mean, all we need is my website down there. It's just my name.com. And on that, I have a bunch of books and a bunch of writing and all that sort of stuff. I even put some pictures, but really what I'm trying to get at is this sort of thing, having this sort of conversation with as many people as I can. There's so many things out there that we all can help each other out with on multiple levels, certainly on the stress levels and helping each other through hard times, but also in sharing the good stuff with each other and learning from each other. So that's really all I want. I encourage people to check it out and find a way to shoot the breeze with me. There are multiple ways to connect with me. So it's there on the website. So thanks.
That is awesome. And I love what you just said there, because there is so many different ways that we need to unite and start getting to know our neighbors again and knowing their names and all those types of things. So I'm glad you said that because that is so important to hear.
Well, I think the type of work that you're doing is absolutely pushing that in the right direction. So thank you and congratulations for doing it.
I appreciate it, and it's my pleasure, man. It's been therapy for myself, so I'm kind of greedy. So, well, I'm gonna put you back in the green room, and then I'm gonna throw my little exit out, and then I'll be with you in just a minute.
All right, sir.
Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
Wow, man, that was a very good conversation. A lot of things that I didn't know. I always kind of wondered why, you know, we never had any exams, no CAT scans or nothing. And they said, "Oh yeah, you've got it." No, you don't. And now I do. Now I've learned, and I hope a lot of you guys out there learn that maybe you might want to get checked if there's some questions that you have. You know, for myself, it's memory and a few other things that I struggle with. Sometimes word choice, and I think it's important that we learn ourselves to know ourselves and know when something's wrong. So make sure that you are talking to the doctors, discuss it with other friends, family members, whatever. And I hope you take something from this video. I hope you guys go to his website, check out his books. They sound very fascinating. I will be ordering a few of his as well because I love having the books from the guests on my back shelf that's behind me. And I think it's amazing what veterans do. You know, the will for us to succeed is always amazing. So, like I always say, I hope you guys have a great day. Don't let the day kick your ass. Kick its ass. Y'all take care. We will see you next week.